off. Welcome everyone to Center for Victory's webinar, Managing Employee Engagement and Emotion During These Times. With me, going to do most of the talking today, thank goodness, because I think I'm already talked out from this morning, is Christy Cawley. She's gone through this topic already with several other folks, and just very timely information for what we have going on. For those of you that want to re-watch this, it will be up on our YouTube channel once we get this downloaded and edited, so you can go back and watch it again, as well as share it with anybody else who may want to watch it or you feel needs to watch it. So Christy, I know there's a lot of information, a lot of great information today in this one. So let's get started. Okay. And you can kick it off. I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. So welcome everyone again. So happy to have you join us this afternoon. I put together this session, this topic of discussion for us today, mainly from a perspective of recognizing that right now, as we are on the 24th of April, which, take a deep breath everyone, yes, we've made it to the end of April, there is probably a lot of really sensitive and important and critical conversations that you've already started having or you will be having. A lot of that may be poised based on how your company or your organization has been navigating the COVID-19 crisis, whether you've gone to remote work, whether you've furloughed employees. There's been a lot of work disruption. And with that in mind, you may be just starting to kind of put your arms around what are the next run of conversations that I need to have with my employees, with my team, with my business. It might be a recall practice. Building your recall plan might be a topic that we're going to cover the next 2 weeks with you. But what are those kind of discussions I need to have? And how do I best have those discussions? And as I'm making so much focus time looking at the details and the information I need to share, sometimes we're not putting as equal planning time into predicting what the emotional response to those conversations might be. And we might be in kind of an emotional state ourselves. So just keep in mind that's the facet of communication that this session today is kind of based on, and hopefully this will give you some good tips for navigating it. So with anything, we're going to kind of cover self-awareness, right? For those of you who've heard us talk, it's a healthy dose of self-awareness and authenticity that makes the world go round. And certainly you can predict greater success out of your conversations with that approach. So let's kind of dive into self-awareness. How do you get it? Well, one, I think you have to really have a mindset. You have to make a decision that you want to channel your self-awareness. You want to kind of take a look at yourself and say, self, how am I really, what kind of person am I bringing to this conversation? So some of us do a deep dive with our predictive index, and know a number of you just from your names are PI clients. So I have to tell you, this is the time to get back to the basics. This is the time to kind of look at those subtle insights and say, wow, I bet that is really being dialed up or dialed back right now. Remember, our natural preferences for approaching decision-making, problem solving, and communication can really be amplified when we ourselves are under stress. And sometimes we don't even recognize that we're stressed. So be mindful of yourself, kind of take stock of yourself. Are you finding yourself more irritated, a little snappy with your responses? Are you finding that you're having a lot of headaches and neck aches and shoulder aches? You've been parked at your desk quite a bit at home, on your couch, whatever it might be. But take into consideration where your natural state is approaching a lot of these conversations and decisions. For those of you who are new to our organization and our practice, welcome. We're more than happy to have you. There's a lot of techniques you can use. We certainly would love to have you take a PI. You can take it complimentary. and get a report. That's a really good way. Do a deep dive. So for those of you, just as a kind reminder, pull out those PI reports and take a look at that narrative again and kind of give some thought to where you might be really amplifying your natural approach. Along with that comes something that I'd like to bring to your attention. I want you to really think through your leadership style normally, right? Pre-COVID-19 crisis. How would you perhaps view yourself or describe your more natural leadership style? There's a number of styles. There's pros and cons to everything, right? There's upsides and there's cautions to all of our gifts. And we want to keep that in mind. Right now, part of what you might be considering is, what's the best leadership style to deliver and to demonstrate given the state of our organization and our state of our employees? Our best practice, our go-to style, our success practices may not be the best to align with the needs of our organization right now. So I've put together, there's a link here on our website in our slide deck. And again, you'll have this to access as a follow-up to this session. But you may want to kind of tap into some leadership styles. And keep in mind that when you're interacting with others, your whole person is showing up, right? It's not your PI. It's not your leadership style. It's not even your values. It's a combination of all of that and all the triggers and pressures that you have coming by way of what your recent situation has been. I think the one thing to keep in mind is with COVID-19, coronavirus, it's not equitable. The experience is not equitable. Some of us are truly in pain. We've had profound changes in our health, in the lives of our loved ones, our network of friends and family, our community. Some of us may have had a much shorter margin of coping with day-to-day life than others. And so we may find ourselves right now really being worried about eating, right? Or we may have missed our rent payments. So it's a profound impact and it creates more pain. Some of us are really inconvenienced, right? What we like to do and how we like to live our lives has been disrupted and it's an inconvenience to us. So there's a broad spectrum of experiences that people are actually having with this crisis. And we all have to eat our own medicine, take our own medicine. It's our own surgery, it's our own pain. So right now, recognize that that whole person is showing up and their experience and how they're showing up to the conversation may be vastly different from how you're approaching it or what you think the topic is going to be. So just use a healthy dose of patience right now and a healthy dose of sensitivity for yourself and for others. It's probably the best advice I can give you.
Yeah.
So this visual, I think, will be important. Eric, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for some leaders, this is a hard time. I've been having a lot of conversations, as have you, over the past few 6 weeks, but especially the past 2 weeks of leaders that are really just, tired because they're used to leading in such a certain way, and now they're having to shift and spend more time with people and try to manage in a different way. And in high velocity or high stress situations, as you said, there's leadership styles, there's good sides and bad sides of it. And sometimes we do have to adapt. And that's hard when we've been used to status quo all day long. And now we've got to make that shift, but you do have to make that shift to do those things, but keep yourself in tune as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. So if we can move to the next slide.
Sure.
Thanks. So under stress, right? And we went through this a couple weeks ago. We talked about regulating, ourselves, self-regulation under stress. So this is just a kind reminder. We're now 2 weeks past it, and even more stuff has been happening. And some of you may be, planning your return to work plan right now. You may be looking to hopefully start phasing in return to work practices. And so as you're thinking about this, there's a lot of stress on how these dynamics are all going to work. And a lot of us don't have, cookie cutter answers. It's not like there's a kit that you can order on Amazon and have delivered. Like, how's this supposed to work? We're kind of creating and figuring out the nuances of how we operate and get revenue going again, and how we anticipate the interaction with our clients and our customers. So under stress, there's a number of things that happen from a neuroscience standpoint. And Eric, maybe you can just comment on a few of these things as a nice reminder.
Sure. Going back into, this is straight from neuroscience, but this is what I used to actually back in the day talk to parents about this, right? But it's very relevant for today's conversation, because when any of us are under stress, and the thing you have to understand there is stress is different for certain people. What's your stress may not be my stress. What's my stress may not be your stress. But whenever that stress becomes too great, and what Hans Selye would have called distress, we lose the ability to think, be reasonable and logical. I had this happen to me yesterday, a total fiasco with someone. They just weren't thinking very logically and clearly. The second piece with that is, when we stress, we regress. We go back toward really what I say our developmental zone of comfort. And for a lot of people right now, that is to just escape. Or the other thing is to just dive in and try to conquer everything, or there's not a lot of fulfillment, and it makes other people in your environment crazy. But the biggest piece, and what I see this doing to even families nowadays, is when that stress becomes too great, we all become naturally challenged in our own internal attachment systems. And what that means is how we relate to one another, whether we can or cannot. And when that stress is too great, then we can't relate in a way that's suitable, that's reasonable, and we either push away or become aggressive or just completely zone out. So we have to be aware of those things that are going on for not only just ourselves, because when we're not regulated as leaders, we can't regulate anybody else. It's just physiologically impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And especially I think when we're in kind of that reactive zone, sometimes, again, things are just very noisy and very muddled, right? So some tips in this point in time, when you're really preparing for this next wave of decisions, discussions, interactions that you have with your team, really make sure that you, I think, discipline yourself to getting some objective insight. Am I really processing this information with the clarity that I need, right? Or am I simply reacting to it? Some of us need to talk through that with someone else to kind of make sense out of it, or kind of use somebody else as a sounding board. Some of us need to kind of make a list of pros and cons. Some of us, again, might go back to our PIs and read it and go, yeah, that sounds like me. And that really sounds like me right now. So get some objective insight in whatever way works best for you. Physically regulate by taking a break. Sometimes you need to give your brain really a little permission to rest and just make sense out of the information. So for some of us, just walking away, taking a deep breath, making a list, kind of getting the information, the noise out of your head, take a break from that topic, go do some other things and come back with some clarity can really be a healthy way. Step away from your laptop or your PC. Take some time to prepare and kind of stabilize your emotions. Not become neutral, right? But just stabilize. So that you're not so quick to have a reaction to something, that you can kind of breathe and process and really try to understand what might be behind a response or a conversation with a colleague or a staff member. We're going to go into that in a few minutes. But definitely plan some talking points to also bridge reactions. I'm going to kind of go through that in a number of different ways. I think that's really a healthy approach for most of our conversations. So if we can kind of move along with this, that'd be great. As we're kind of thinking about communication, there's typically three conversational categories that are occurring at all times in our work. We'll just say our workplace. It also happens at home, which I'm sure many of you are acutely aware of right now. There are conversations that we are having that we should be having, and that's really the block or the zone of conversation categories that we really want to focus on right now. There's a lot of key information that you have to share. So conversations you are having that you should be having, you're preparing to have. Now, going on the side of that, there are also conversations that we aren't having that we should be having. And a lot of times we're avoiding those conversations because we're not sure of the reaction, or we're predicting a reaction that we don't feel confident in coping with. So that's where we're going to help you out today. We also have conversations that we're having, and we have all the time, that we really shouldn't be having. Okay, they're deflectors, they're distractors, they're not appropriate. They're really not helping to bring completion or solution to the conversation that we should be having. We can get derailed in these really important conversations by veering into conversations that we really shouldn't be having. So I want you to kind of think about how this is all tied together. And in thinking about this, here are a couple of tips. So I think if you just move, yeah, thanks, Eric. I have to remember those tips. So one, determine the conversation you intend to have, right? Is this a social? Is this just checking in with them? Like, we're going to let the conversation go where it needs to have. Those are healthy conversations to have right now. Okay, it doesn't all have to be business tactics and tasks. It's personal, checking in on you. How are you doing? Here's how I'm doing. It's okay to relate to one another, right? I don't want to have a conversation that we shouldn't be having, and I need to guard myself against what those conversations might be. So here's a tip for you. You probably have a natural ability to fall into that zone with certain employees more so than other employees. Don't you? Just give that some thought. Probably some people under your roof right now too, right? It may be the way they respond or react to the subject matter. It may be related to your maybe discomfort with the conversation. So yeah, I'm really happy to start talking about our dogs instead of talking about, your recall order, or how your job has changed, or the fact that we're not bringing back certain people on your team, and that conversation has to happen. It's really easy to derail and get into other types of conversations instead of the one you really need to have. So just think through that and be aware of it. And then number 3, design some talking points to stay focused yet empathetic. Remember the emotion that whole person is showing up to this conversation, and you don't know what happened 5 minutes before you're having this conversation with them. You don't know what filtering is in place for them in dealing with all of this change. So you want to stay focused and yet relatable and empathetic, right? Versus aloof and disconnected and uncaring. That's not going to help you at this point in time. So we always train people, especially myself, like I'm coming out of a corporate HR background, just stick to the points, and, you have to share key information. You do, but you can also share it in a very personally and thoughtful way. Don't go to such a script where you reduce the fact that you see them as a person. That is by far the most important point that I can make to any of you right now. Don't treat your work relationships like transactions, okay? So design some talking points that might sound something like, I can see from your reaction, this is really catching you by surprise. Do you need to take some time to really process this topic or the information I'm sharing? Okay. I'm hearing from your tone of voice that you sound very angry. You sound very angry at the message I'm sharing with you right now. Do you need some time to kind of collect what it is you need more discussion around, right? This isn't a helpful conversation. This isn't a productive conversation, so I'm going to let you have some space, right? Those might be some talking points or ways of bridging the conversation. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Hopefully this is of help to some of you.
Yeah, Christy, those conversations that we aren't having that we should be having,
Yeah.
I've noticed those through a lot of our calls the past few weeks.
Yeah.
And just people saying, well, I don't know if I should bring it up right now. But the other thing that I notice with that is the person that doesn't bring it up, it just continues to fester and fester and fester.
Yeah.
And it's not good for anybody. And then
Right.
it never happens, or we dip into that. We have conversations about that other person that we shouldn't be having, and just, it just continues to spiral out of control.
Yeah. So you really need, where you really start with all of that is taking stock of yourself. Where are you on that continuum of kind of holding or being a vessel for all that information? And is it productive for you to address that scenario, that issue, that pattern of behavior, that incident right now? Or is it water under the bridge? And you know what, we've all been working remotely. The work is seemingly going pretty well right now. I'm going to remember that that's an issue when we all get back to working together, and I'll bring it up when it's appropriate. But you need to almost claim your decisions right now, folks. When you are having these tough conversations or these really monumental decisions with your folks, you can't throw everything but the kitchen sink at them. If you're talking to them about their job changing, their job is changing right now because your work has changed. Their job isn't changing necessarily because of their performance back in January or February. You almost need to block and tackle right now, and just decide not everything is a priority to share. You got to almost pick and choose. So as an HR professional, what I'm saying to you is, right now is not the time to be policing your policies. Doesn't mean you ignore them. It means be flexible with some of the policies and really speak to where you need to engage and where you have expectations of performance and behavior in the scenario that your business is operating in right now, moving forward. And get clear about what that conversation is. So there's a lot of different types of conversations that'll come up. When we're talking about performance and career pathing and project management and deliverables and accountability and our working dynamic ourselves, as colleagues or as coworkers or as manager and direct report. But more so than anything right now, if you just click one more, Eric, it's really about workforce change. Who you are as an organization and how people are functioning in their roles is going to be profoundly different in the next couple of weeks moving forward than it ever was before. Even if their job stays the same, the way that job is going to interact with other departments and other people, with other clients, how they're having to manage their home life responsibilities along with their work may be profoundly challenged and may create some real dynamics. So workforce change is here, and it's here for everyone. The hard part is we don't have a crystal ball to truly understand what it's going to mean to each person. So as we're looking at this, if you just move forward, Eric, right? We want to get ready to kind of predict. So this is a key part of really preparing yourself. And I do a courageous conversations training, and I do this with a lot of coaching. Eric, I know you do as well. But I think at this point in time, there's a number of different buckets of responsibility you have. One, conversation-wise, what are the decisions that you need to explain, right? Why is our company moving forward in the direction that it's moving in? What is the key decision that's occurring right now, and what is going to happen that will affect your role? How we expect you to navigate or transition into this role, however we've now described it, and when is that going to happen? It may be job elimination, it may be work reprioritization, it may be assuming responsibility that was done by several other people in the department. It may be a continuation of working remotely, and hey, this isn't just a short-term thing. This is now going into month 3, month 4, or whatever it might be. So I think really preparing, so you have to get all your facts together and figure out what all those decisions are, what your communication plan is. Number 2, what are the documents that you need to prepare? Is there a furlough letter? Is there a recall letter? Is there a return to work plan? Are there some new policies? Are you instituting some standards that represent or reinforce the health and safety and hygiene standards that are being recommended? How is that going to be expressed and set as a standard? The third part is preparing to actually have a meaningful conversation that can actually be productive. And that is probably the best definition of the best of what you can bring to a conversation to make sure it can be productive, that you're able to give information that allows the employee to make an informed decision. And that you do that in a way that supports however they're going to respond. So I've used this, I have permission to use this matrix from Career Minds. It's an organization that does a lot of outplacement work for all size organizations. I'm an outplacement coach with them. I've worked with them for like 5 years. But I love this matrix because we use this in our practice to help our clients understand when you're about to have a conversation with an employee, whether it's virtually like this or by way of a phone call or exchanging a letter. They may have any given reaction that they choose to have. You have no control over it. You have control over yourself. You have no control over the employee. What is going to happen is going to be a combination of what you expect, what you never saw coming, or somewhere in between. So I've skinnied this down to help you kind of just have a framework that kind of identifies the type or description of reaction that you might get. Going across the top, of a wide array. A happy, joyful response, I figure you can probably navigate through pretty quickly. But here's the key thing. You need to be present in the conversation. And a lot of times we rush and we race to get all the information expressed, to say it, to kind of go through our bullet points. And in doing that, sometimes we're not as present in slowing down, checking in, viewing how they're reacting or listening for how they react. And really what you're listening for is not on the surface how they're reacting, but what might be triggering that, where that reaction might be coming from. Now, for those of you who use PI, pull out your PI reports on these employees before you have the conversation. Try to predict what might be their go-to style. What might you anticipate? Somebody who has a lot of verbal hostility, might be really feeling rejected, like they've personally failed somehow. Somebody who is very stoic and not giving you a response at all could actually be in shock, right? Or just passive and numb, right? They can't think. So you might want to make sure that you build in some time to have them think about questions or where they might need more information and give them permission to get back to you. So the suggestion line kind of goes along with the top reaction, which is observable behavior, right? From our PI training, you all understand that. We make lots of assumptions based on observable behavior. But in order to really motivate or really connect with people and build trust, we need to understand where they're coming from. Sometimes these reactions are a way of basically telling us they need more information, or the information that we're providing doesn't satisfy them. It's not satisfying their fear or their concern. So it's really important to be prepared to be able to give context to the information you're sharing. Stay calm. You may not have all the answers. Make a note, that's a great question. I'd like to give you a thoughtful answer. And I'm going to do so by making a list of what questions you have and making sure I have all the information, because at the end of the conversation with you right now, you're going to be receiving a letter from me. or I'm going to be sending you an email that's going to outline some of the things that we just discussed. And I'd like you to give that some thought, let it process, and then let me know where you might need some more information. I'm here to be a resource to you, even if what you're sharing doesn't feel like it's in their best interest, right? You can still be an effective resource. The key is to keep your tone businesslike and professional, to breathe, allow the person time to have the emotion that they have. Don't tell them not to worry about it. You can't assure them that they don't have something to worry about. What you can assure them is you're going to make sure that you're going to get all the information to them that can help them navigate this. Does that make sense? I'm going to stop there because this is really tough information. I want to make sure that, as we're layering in some other pieces to this, that we take like a pause here and just see, Eric, if some people have some direct questions or experiences they've had that they wish to share that can really enrich it for everyone else.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add here too, Christy, is we're waiting if anybody has questions, they can either do it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when we're looking at this, is not to exacerbate, as leaders, not to exacerbate these feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, and you pointed out a little bit, but leaders exacerbate these feelings when they don't understand them by invalidating or arguing or disagreeing against them. And then that just, it sets the floodgates open for more of that negative reaction to happen. Mm-hmm. And then what's worse about that is then that person really doesn't hold accountability for themselves for having that. Now they have somebody to blame. So you've just kind of taken that on, and we don't need that at any time, but especially as leaders right now.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's to recognize, what the emotional display is. Like I can hear your concerns, and I recognize that. Wording like that tends to be more coactive. It tends to be more relation oriented versus when you say, well, I know how you feel and I know how hard this is. No, you don't. You're not actually standing in their shoes. You're not sitting in their home. You may not necessarily be experiencing the same thing, and you're certainly not experiencing the message that they're experiencing because you've had time to plan it. They haven't. So try not to self-identify with the message that you're sending, because it does tend to most often dilute your intent to be resourceful and to be of help. And the other thing that I would say is a lot of us get really worried about having these conversations. They're not conversations that we look forward to having. They're hard. Change is hard. And you have perhaps a whole number of these conversations in front of you to have, so it's overwhelming for you. Resist the urge to have these conversations with each employee be therapeutic for you. So resist the urge to saying, I know how hard this is. This was really hard for me to pick up the phone and call you about this, and I've been agonizing about it. This isn't about you. This is about them. Those are the conversations that you have with your circle of friends, with your coach, with your colleagues, with your partner, right? With your PI, with your PR consultant, okay? Use this as a sounding board. Like, you can express that stuff to us. That's where that belongs. But with each of these employees, when you're calling them about how the company's decisions are going to impact their roles, that's not the time for you to kind of participate in that discussion. You're there as an avenue of presenting good information to give them the best perspective possible to understand what their next steps are, what's expected of them, and how to somewhat normalize. Does that make sense for everyone? And it's a hard trap. These are the traps that are really easy to fall into. So you've got to almost plan for how you might be triggered in these conversations to very easily slip into one of those conversations you shouldn't be having. Okay, so I'll watch the chat, and certainly if anybody has anything to comment or contribute, you're welcome. But in planning and preparing for these conversations, really get your heads circled or focused around what's my intention for the conversation and what do I hope to achieve, right? How do I want to show up to the conversation? Get some sleep, right? Have a glass of water, have some tissues. You might be emotional, it's okay. It's okay. But just be prepared for it. Have some talking points, right? Don't go cold with your conversations. If you have some talking points about what it is you need to share, at least practice, get those words out before you have the conversation with the individual. Even if you need to review them with your dog listening, whatever options you have right now, guys, it works, right? Get the words said so you hear through your own ears how it might sound. And then above all else, give some thought to how you want the other person to walk away feeling. Because over a long period of time, Maya Angelou says this, and it's a wonderful quote from her, and it's here on my wall, and I go back to it all the time because it's a good, solid reminder. She had said, over time, I have learned that people will never remember exactly what you said and remember exactly what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So in these tough conversations that you're preparing to have, and again, these conversations may be okay with the employee, right? Like, okay, I expected this, or I saw this coming. You can count on me. I mean, you might have a really participatory response, and that's great. Let that be a surprise. But plan for some emotion, okay? And really get clear on why you care about this person, right? I really respect how disciplined you are, how committed you are. Really respect, the humor that you bring to our team. Whatever characteristic about them really relates to them as an individual. Make sure you're ready to say that or share that with them. Draft a frame for the discussion and key points. Anticipate their reaction. For yourself, depending on who you are and what your go-to is, a couple talking points to bridge the emotion. And then really just be quiet, right? Practice some listening skills. Let them respond, okay? For those of us who talk really fast with a lot of words, slow it down, okay? Helpful tips? Big one. The past 5 weeks, 6 weeks, really tough for a lot of people. I know I've probably worked harder this past 5 weeks than I have all the time, and I work pretty hard, right? But I'm so grateful, right? I'm grateful for so many of you on the phone right now as my clients. So you have to recognize survivor guilt. You may have it yourself. You may be living with it at home. And this may be playing a role in the conversations that you're about to have with a lot of people. In turn, you also have to recognize that a lot of members of your team, in kind of coming back to work or phasing our work in again, will be carrying this with them. They feel bad that they were retained when someone else was let go. All right, it's called survivor guilt. And it's an endless loop of thinking that you could have or should have done something different that could have affected it. And in fact, there's nothing you could have done. None of us made this happen, right? No, none of us did something wrong as managers. We're just now trying to make decisions for the viability of our organizations moving forward. So some of the things to be watchful for, and Eric, if you just press forward, it'll populate. Definitely watching behavioral changes, reactive changes in your team. Being mindful of the interaction that you're seeing on your Zoom calls with people can tell you a lot about what's going on. Some people might have more physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches, even eye strain right now. It's not survivor guilt. We're spending a lot of time in front of our laptops on webinars and watching videos and things. So, eye strain is a big piece of it, but those are also symptoms that come out sometimes of this type of phenomena that people might be experiencing. The best direction, don't dismiss it. Don't overly simplify it. Acknowledge it. Call it what it is. It doesn't go away by ignoring it. People aren't going to work through it naturally. This is a stress reaction, and there's going to be some time that's needed to heal. So a couple of things you can do is, one, give yourself some time to grieve. Some folks, you're going to have to lay them off or reduce their pay, and you know it's putting them in terrible jeopardy. You can be sad about that. I would hope that you would feel something about that. You may have that exist within your team. Try not to ghost the people who are no longer with you as if we talk about them. Encourage workplace friendships. Encourage people to reach out to some other people who maybe aren't coming back in a thoughtful way, in a sensitive way. Remind yourself you're not alone. Work with colleagues. And share your feelings with people you trust. And above all, as much as some of us don't do well with structure, we really crave it, and it brings comfort. So try to stick to a daily routine to just kind of help you emotionally navigate this as well. And above all, seek professional help. There's no stigma. You might tap into your EAP program. You should definitely reintroduce your EAP programs to your employees. A lot of times we don't mention it. It's there for a reason, and a lot of people are going to need it. They can work through their primary care physician. There's resources like NAMI Keystone. They're a wonderful group. They've got support groups and all kinds of online information to help navigate maybe these feelings of anxiety or stress, and COVID-induced stress and anxiety is a whole new classification. So there's a lot of information here for you, because I know being an effective leader isn't just leading the to-do list, it's really leading your team and your people, and this is a key piece of it. Eric, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, well, with that, going back to that, I mean, always read about it years and years ago with my studies and my background, and really saw that a lot with the work I did in Colorado after the Columbine stuff happened.
Yeah.
These folks that survived, even into their young adult years, were still struggling with the fact, like, okay, why wasn't it me? Mm-hmm. And you have this, but why I wanted to point that out with all, to be aware of, it also can be traumatic in the fact that it sets in, but it will also, if we're not aware of it and we're not proactive, it will impact the relationships that we once had with people.
Yeah, it absolutely will. It absolutely will.
Yes.
Yeah. So a couple of things just in kind of closing, some engagement tips for right now. Really focus on staff retention and communication. I highly recommend, for those of you who can, do some stay interviews, with your team. What makes this work so compelling for you? Why do you show up on our video chats each day? What's keeping you motivated? Really gives you more insight on their personal connection with the work that you're doing and that sense of belonging within your team. This is a time to right set some things that maybe weren't as effective or as productive as it could have been. Recognize that survivor guilt may be embedded in your team dynamics, and that may look really different for me than it would look for Eric. So again, we always say with PI, like, treat people the same by treating them different. Be present with your team and really understand maybe where they're coming from right now. And keep that in mind over the next 90 days, 120 days, remainder of the year. Make sure that as we're kind of compartmentalizing and making our plans to communicate information and maybe work transition with individual employees, that we also have a communication plan back to the team itself. You can't control, there's going to be lots of texting going on, like, oh, she just called me about that. It's going to happen, as much as you try to control it. But coming back to your team and saying, here's what's happened, here's the decision that was made, here's some of the things that have occurred with members of our team, and I want you to hear it from me versus someplace else. You know, we were only able to bring back X number of positions, and these are the positions that were decided upon, and that's why you're here today. There are some people whose positions are no longer able to be accommodated. We think the world of them. We would want to refer them. If there's opportunities that you hear of, please share it with them. We want to do our best to do right by them. So continue to support the remaining staff, encourage workplace friendships, and also take a step up and do something that typically we don't do. Really do whatever you can to make sure the people that are no longer with you have a chance to be competitive for opportunities. Even if that means recommending them to a competitor, right? The way you treat them is going to do an awful lot for your employment brand and also for you as a personal leader. Collaborate with your team to solve problems. You don't have to have all the answers. You can't possibly have all the answers. Leverage your team. They probably have a lot of insight. So use it wisely as a new power skill. And then really recognize your team accomplishments and efforts each week as much as you're really focusing on the strategies and the goals and the tasks. At the beginning of the week, set a plan that everybody can align on. The end of the week, really recognize the effort that people put forth to help deliver on that plan. And I think that at least gives you some framework for healthy engagement right now. Any questions? Any scenarios, any topics, things happening in your own organizations that maybe you want to use this group as a sounding board to kind of review?
I have a question.
Sure. Who's this?
So, hi, Christy. So when we furloughed a couple of employees, and we're intending on bringing them back shortly. And but one of the things that has happened throughout that is one of the employees, we've been taking over his work and communicating with his customers. He's a developer, so he works directly with our customers. And we found some problems basically where he hasn't been communicating well with the customers. Okay. So my question is, like, at what point, like, we really want to address this problem that we've become aware of. At what point would you think it would be good to address that problem? You know, like, I don't, like, he walks in the door, I don't want to hit him with it, or maybe I should. You know, it's kind of like we really need this to change. If you want to continue to work with us. But where in the process would you recommend doing something like that?
Sure. So I think along those lines, I think that's a really good question. And I think a lot of people will have this experience in for a lot of different reasons. So I think with there's like a communication plan and execution that you need to have on what's the status of people's jobs, right? So when you're in touch with this individual and you say, hey, you know, we are planning to recall you and on this date to come back and do this, and you know, you're sending a recall letter. I'm sure you're documenting it and formalizing it appropriately. And you know, what are your thoughts? Do you have any concerns? What are some things that you feel that you might need in order to make coming back and transitioning back into your work the most successful that it can be? And I'd like you to give that some thought. The first week that you're back, something that I'd like to do is really have kind of a state of the place conversation with you. And let's talk about your role moving forward. Our clients are kind of going through transition. We've been covering some work for you over the past several weeks, and I have some new insights on some things that I need to be able to share with you. And I want to make sure that you're set up for success, really hitting the ground running and instilling confidence in our clients as we kind of resume work. That's how I would approach it. And then when you sit down with him, you give him those examples like, hey, here's a couple of things that I found. I think you can enhance the level and the frequency or the quality of your communication with your clients by doing this, this, and this. What are your thoughts on that? What's been getting in the way? Did you realize that? And have more of that personal coaching conversation.
Great, that's perfect. Thanks. I appreciate it.
And then set an expectation of when you'd want to review kind of improvement. right?
Okay.
Like, let's check in again in 2 weeks and kind of see how things are going. And just to let you know, I'm probably going to do some spot checking with some of the clients that I've been chatting with. And I'm just going to circle back around to them. I just want to make sure that you're on really strong footing, kind of moving forward.
Great.
I think
Thank
it
you.
would
I
work well.
appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, hey, this is a topic near and dear